guys, welcome back to Nadir Audio. Today we're going to be taking a look at my vintage Mitsubishi DA-R20 stereo receiver as featured in the August 1980 issue of Audio Magazine. Okay guys, so this is my DA-R20 receiver, circa 1980. I bought this a few years ago on Craigslist, paid less than $100 for it, and I used it as a fully fledged receiver for a long time. Used it with a few different vintage speakers, and I think the last speakers that I used with this were the ELAC B5s that I first used when I got the Sprout. And you know, I think it was pretty good. So if you're a vintage receiver person and you're sort of familiar with the solid state sound of the 70s from, you know, like Marantz and Pioneer, Sherwood, Sansui, those kinds of receivers. This is similar to that in some ways, but it's veering a little bit into the more analytical sound of the 80s. So you're going to get a little bit more neutral response, you know, across the bass, mids, and highs, which I think is actually a good thing, but it doesn't sound sterile like some of the later receivers did. So I think it's a nice kind of middle ground. And I'll talk a little bit more about the sound when we look at the audio article a little later in the video. But in my current setup, we're just using this primarily as a tuner, and I think that's really where the strength of this thing lies. It has a built-in analog tuner, so we have an analog dial here, and then we have a digital readout, but it is not a digital tuner. So this is basically just telling you what the frequency is. You know, if you're on the FM band, you're basically looking to the nearest 100th kilohertz, and if you're on AM, it's just to the nearest kilohertz. And it's actually pretty accurate. It's more accurate than any other tuner that I've used. Over here on the left, we have you know, our tuning VU, which still works and is helpful. This signal strength VU is actually the only thing functionally that no longer works on this. But that's okay, because I'm able to tune in everything I need to. I'm just using this cheap Turk FM antenna for FM reception. I have that up here on top of the cabinet, and it works great. It pulls in everything here in Austin that I want to listen to, including 89.5, which is a good classical radio station here. So yeah, you know, it seems a little strange to have this big heavy thing being used as mainly just a tuner, but it's also handy as a source selector for audio sources. So it has this record selector out. So basically everything from this volume knob over to right before the power switch, we're not using any of that except for the record selector, and this allows us to route either the tuner or some of my other sources to the analog in on the Sprout, and that works really well. I will mention this thing does have a phono preamp built in, which is sort of interesting. It has this selector where you can switch the equalization curve from one optimized for moving magnet to one optimized for moving coil, which is kind of cool. I'd used the phono preamp built into this before, and it's pretty decent for one of these from this vintage. Not as good as you know, a standalone, or even the phono stage built into the Sprout. I would say is definitely better. But you know, this thing is not bad, especially considering the fact that you could probably pick one up. They come up fairly regularly on eBay and Craigslist. You can generally get one for about $40 or $50 in working condition, which is not bad. And this one actually is in fairly good condition. There was the signal VU doesn't work, which is not worth for me trying to fix. I might fix it if something else stops working, like the tuner as a whole at some point. And then on mine, the case, as you can see, is sort of warped. And you know, back here you can probably see that this metal vent doesn't quite fit in right anymore because everything's warped a little bit. So the case on mine's just in fair condition, but the receiver itself's in excellent condition. Usually when you get these things, they're all scratched up, but this thing is actually pretty nice, and I like the look of it too. You know, that's not true of all the Mitsubishi stuff from this vintage. If you look at some of it, a lot of it just kind of look like VCRs. But this one, I think they did a nice job, and I like the style too. I like the way that it looks in my setup. So yeah, that's it. You know, primarily a tuner. Here in Austin, we have a lot of radio stations that are worth listening to, and a lot of radio stations that are not, you know, overly compressed to the point where they just sound terrible. It's been really nice having this tuner since we moved here. So yeah, I use this thing a lot. So yeah, let's take a look at that article in Audio Magazine. Okay guys, so this is the August 1980 issue of Audio Magazine. So if you're not familiar with this, it was a pretty popular audio magazine. So actually I first subscribed to a magazine in the 80s when I was a teenager, and that was Stereo Review. So if you know that one, audio is sort of similar to Stereo Review in that it's very focused on specifications and measurements, and they don't spend a lot of time talking about, you know, subjective listening tests, things like that. You know, since the 90s, my taste have kind of veered more towards magazines like Stereophile and The Absolute Sound that focus a lot more just on subjective listening tests. And I'm actually currently a subscriber to Stereophile. It's still a great magazine. But you know, I like all vintage hi-fi magazines. I think they're kind of cool and fun to look at, all the old pictures of cool stuff. You know, and this one, you know, you open them up and you get these great advertisements. I mean, there's right here we have a Pioneer reel-to-reel, really cool looking reel-to-reel, and it's like a gatefold with another really nice Pioneer cassette deck. And you know, there's just all kinds of cool advertisements and things in here. This particular issue also has a very interesting interview with Paul Klipsch. And we all know about Klipsch. If you don't know too much about the founder, he's a very colorful guy, and this is actually a very interesting article. So maybe I'll give you guys more information on that in a future video. But you know, we have that stuff. We have equipment reviews. There's this kind of interesting article in here on alternative speaker technologies, you know, where they talk about, you know, electrostatic drivers and planars, and you know, a lot of the stuff that we're, you know, familiar with and comfortable with now, but at the time, you know, they were maybe considered to be exotic. Ooh, we have a nice Revox receiver here. That's cool. Got a picture of Bob Carver hamming it up in an ad over here. And then we get to the actual review of the Mitsubishi DA-R20. And so they talk a little bit about, you know, how this was Mitsubishi's entry into a sort of lower price point market. And that they were trying to keep the really good sound intact, but you know, getting to the price point just by eliminating some of the features they had in their separates. And in general, it's a good review. You know, it's mostly focused on the measurements, but they do talk quite a bit about the tuner, which they liked a lot, and I would concur with that assessment. I think it's a great tuner built into it. You know, there's all kinds of measurements, and you know, you got all your graphs and curves and stuff that you're used to seeing. Quite a bit of that. But they actually do have a section here, pretty much this whole page on the left, which is listening tests. So they did talk a little bit subjectively about what they thought about this receiver, and basically they thought it was great. That they thought that for the 60 watts per channel that you're getting, that it had a lot of dynamic range and was able to handle dynamics pretty well. And I would definitely agree with that as well. You know, it's sort of interesting. They talk about testing it with some dbx-encoded vinyl discs. And if you don't know anything about that, Techmoan did a pretty interesting video all about dbx-encoded discs. And if I remember, I'll put a link to it in the description below. But they were very impressed with how it was able to handle the sort of increased dynamics of those particular recordings, and they think that it was, you know, did very well for the price, and I would agree with that. Sort of interesting. On a side note, they did a review on the Shure SM81 condenser mic, and I have a couple of you know, probably the children of this particular mic. I think they're AXS4s that I used a lot in the late 90s and early 2000s to record in the band I was in then, and they are great condenser mics, so yeah, I'd agree with them on that as well. But yeah, that's pretty much it for this installment. Like I said, I may create another video in the future. There are a couple of other particularly interesting articles in this magazine that I think maybe would be worth investigating a little bit more in a future video. But yeah, for now, as far as the Mitsubishi, you know, I think it's always cool when you have a vintage piece of equipment to go back and hunt down a review and kind of see you know, what people thought of it back in the time. It's always kind of fun, and you get to see lots of other cool pictures, and yeah, it's all good. So yeah, I think that's it for this one, guys. So I will see you all in the next video.